Welcome to the Deck Dive. Today, we're jumping into a really powerful piece of spiritual writing.
Yes, Discourse from the series on the Sermon on the Mount.
Exactly. And we're focusing specifically on that very striking imagery in Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14.
The straight gate and the wide gate, yes.
That's the one. It presents this really fundamental fork in the road, doesn't it?
It really does. Two paths, laid out very clearly, and each leading somewhere totally different. It makes you stop and think, really consider the choices we're making.
For sure. So our goal here, our mission in this deep dive, is to unpack what this metaphor means, especially today, and maybe explore its implications for Christian life.
Right.
And given our focus, we'll be thinking particularly about how this connects with Methodist faith and practice.
Which often emphasizes both that personal piety, that inner journey, and also social holiness, how faith plays out in the world.
Precisely. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Have you ever looked around and noticed how some ways of living seem so, popular, almost like the default?
Mm-hmm.
But then you question if they actually lead where people truly want to go deep down. This sermon, well, it tackles that head on.
It certainly does.
Okay, so let's start by looking at these two routes. The sermon paints a pretty vivid picture of the wide gate and Broadway. What's that path like according to the text?
Well, the sermon pulls no punches. It directly links this wide gate and Broadway to sin, to wickedness.
Okay.
But what's really interesting is how it explains the sheer breadth of sin. It mentions that God's commandment is exceeding broad, right? It covers everything.
Right, every aspect of life.
But then it says sin is somehow even broader. Because think about it, there's often just one specific way to really keep a commandment properly, the right action, the right heart attitude.
Yeah, all lined up.
But there are countless ways to miss the mark, to deviate from that point. So sin just has more options, in a way.
That's a fascinating way to put it. How does the sermon kind of flesh that out? Does it give examples of this broadness?
It does. It talks about these root issues, these parent sins, things like a carnal mind, basically a mindset that's hostile to God.
Okay.
And also pride, self-will, wanting your own way, and love of the world, attachment to worldly things.
And these aren't just isolated actions.
No, that's the point. The sermon argues these underlying things seep into everything. Our thoughts, our tempers, our feelings, our affections, what we say, what we do. It's just they're almost constantly influencing us.
Wow. It's a challenging view of just how pervasive these tendencies can be.
It is. And it stresses how many people are actually on this broad path.
Right. The many.
Yeah, the many. The sermon claims it's the majority across all kinds of people, all demographics, even in places considered Christian lands.
So not just people doing obviously bad things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It includes those who might look respectable on the outside, follow the rules outwardly, but inwardly they're driven by things like vanity or resentment or maybe greed. It really challenges that idea that just looking good is enough.
And it connects this to worldly success too, doesn't it? There's a warning there.
A very important warning. It explicitly says that even the, quote, wise, the mighty, the noble, people who achieve a lot by worldly standards can be firmly on this broad way.
So success doesn't equal righteousness?
Not at all. In fact, the sermon suggests those very blessings, intelligence, power, status could be misused, could actually pull them further on the path leading away from God.
Okay, so that's the wide gate, the Broadway. Popular, easy in some senses, but ultimately destructive. What about the alternative, the street gate and narrow way?
Well, this path is directly connected to life, to everlasting life. And the sermon is really clear. Holiness is required to enter. Not just avoiding the worst sins, but a real deep inner transformation.
Renewal, it says.
Exactly. A renewal of our whole being. The gate is strait, which means narrow, constricted. It implies difficulty, needing focused effort, maybe having to shed some baggage to get through.
And the narrow way itself, it's not just about not doing bad things, right? It's about actively pursuing good.
Precisely. It's described as universal holiness. The sermon lists specific characteristics.
Like what?
Things like poverty of spirit, recognizing you depend totally on God. Holy mourning, grieving over sin and brokenness. Meekness, a real hunger and thirst for righteousness. Being merciful, unfeigned love, genuine, not just for show. Purity of heart.
Yeah.
Actively doing good to everyone.
Wow.
And even being willing to suffer, to endure hardship for doing what's right. It's a very comprehensive picture.
It sounds demanding. And the sermon is pretty upfront that not many people find this path
No, it doesn't sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
It makes a pretty stark observation, actually. It suggests that even basic honesty and integrity are, well, sadly uncommon. And that deep inner holiness, that's even rarer.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of leaves you with the question, where are these people?
Yeah.
Where are the truly humble, the serious-minded in faith, the meek, those desperately seeking God, those whose love extends to everyone? The implication is they are few.
This huge difference between the many on the broad way and the few on the narrow naturally leads to another point the sermon makes: the danger of example.
Yes, that's a really crucial part of the warning.
Why is the crowd, the multitude, so dangerous according to this?
Well, it highlights how easily we're influenced by what everyone else is doing, especially if their choices seem easier or more fun or just normal.
Right.
When you see masses of people going one way, seemingly without immediate negative effects, it creates this pull. It makes the narrow way look odd, maybe unnecessarily hard. Like, why bother?
It makes you question if popularity means it must be okay.
Exactly. And that's especially true when the popular examples are people we admire or see as successful.
Like the wise and learned it mentions.
Precisely. The sermon warns about them specifically. The polite, the well-educated, the seemingly sophisticated people who often walk the broad way. They can be very persuasive.
How so?
They might cleverly argue for why the broad way is actually fine, maybe even better. They can twist things, make good seem evil and evil seem good, using clever arguments.
So it's not just peer pressure, it can be intellectual persuasion too.
Yes. And then there's actual power. The sermon mentions the mighty and the noble on the Broadway.
What about them?
Well, they might use their influence, their status, maybe even intimidation or fear rather than reason, to keep people in line or discourage anyone from challenging the status quo, from choosing the narrow way.
And wealth, does that play a role?
Definitely. The rich on the Broadway represent an allure. Their lifestyle can appeal to our own hopes, our desires for comfort and ease. It makes the narrow way, with its emphasis on maybe detachment or self-denial, seem really unattractive, foolish even.
And on the flip side, how does the sermon say those on the narrow way might appear to others?
It's realistic about that too. They might look unwise by worldly standards, unlearned, maybe lacking social grace or status, ignoble,
Not exactly aspirational figures for many.
not in a worldly sense.
Mhm.
And they might even be mocked or persecuted for their beliefs and choices, which, of course, can make others hesitate to join them. Why choose a path that seems to lead to hardship and disapproval?
Okay, so we have the easy, popular, but ultimately destructive path, and the hard, unpopular, but life-giving path. And we're warned about the pull of the crowd. Given all that, the sermon issues this really strong call to action.
Yes, the exhortation to strive.
Enter ye in at the strait gate, but it's more than just entering, isn't it? That word strive.
Right, the Greek word used there, agonizes, implies this intense effort, like striving in agony almost. It suggests a real struggle, a focused, energetic commitment.
So not a half-hearted thing.
Definitely not. It's presented as needing deliberate, persistent effort. You don't just drift onto the narrow way.
And what about that part where it says some will seek to enter but won't be able? What's that about? Is it just too hard?
The sermon seems to link it to not striving earnestly enough and, crucially, not striving in time, before the door closes.
Ah, like in the parable.
Exactly. It suggests there's a window of opportunity, and simply wanting it, or trying half-heartedly, or waiting too long, might mean it's too late. It really ramps up the urgency.
The urgency of choosing now.
Precisely. The sermon is incredibly clear. Being on the Broadway, no matter how many people are with you, leads directly to destruction. There's no compromise suggested.
It highlights this fundamental difference between the world's way and God's way.
Absolutely. Which leads to that very stark statement.
The one about being singular.
Yes. That in these ultimate matters, you have to be singular or be damned. It sounds harsh, but the point is that the way to heaven is fundamentally different from the ways of the world. Choosing it means choosing to be different from the majority.
It's a challenging call. But amidst all this difficulty, the fewness of the travelers, the need to be different, does the sermon offer any encouragement?
It does, thankfully. It offers a glimpse of the future. It reminds the listener, reminds us that even though the group on the narrow way might seem small and insignificant now,
Yes.
they are heading towards this incredible gathering, an innumerable company in the future. Those who have persevered. It holds out that ultimate hope, that final reward.
That's important. So let's bring this back specifically to the Methodist context we mentioned.
Yeah.
How do these ideas, the two ways, the striving, the holiness, resonate within Methodism?
Oh, strongly. Very strongly. That emphasis on the narrow way of holiness really hits at the heart of early Methodism and its ongoing tradition.
How so?
Well, Methodism began as a movement focused on exactly this: deep personal transformation, experiencing faith in a lived way,
Right.
actively cultivating those virtues. The sermon lists humility, love, mercy, seeking righteousness. John Wesley talked constantly about scriptural holiness, both inward and outward.
Right, that pursuit of personal piety.
Yes. And the idea of striving, of disciplined effort through means like prayer, searching the scriptures, fellowship, that's deeply embedded in Methodist practice.
And what about the other side of the coin, social holiness? How does striving for this personal, narrow way connect to engaging with the world?
Well, it connects directly, I think. If you're genuinely striving for this kind of deep holiness, this universal love and righteousness, it's going to change how you interact with society.
It has to. Right.
It has
Yeah.
to. It might lead you to challenge the broad way values you see around you: injustice, greed, indifference. It could motivate you to work for the poor, advocate for the marginalized, basically live out God's love in tangible ways in the community. That's social holiness in action, flowing from that personal commitment.
And the sermons call for close and faithful examination of ourselves. That sounds very Methodist, too.
Absolutely central.
Yeah.
Think of the early Methodist class meetings. Their whole purpose was mutual encouragement, accountability, and yes, honest self-examination.
Asking the hard questions.
Asking, how is it with your soul? Are you truly on this narrow way? Are you growing in holiness? That kind of vigilance is key.
So, while the sermon stresses individual striving, the Methodist structure seems to provide support for that journey.
Definitely. Wesley understood that this narrow way is hard, and we need each other. The class meetings, the bands, the societies, they were designed as communities of support, places to help each other resist the pull of the broad way and encourage each other towards holiness. It wasn't meant to be a solitary struggle.
Which is helpful because that idea of being singular, of having to stand apart, can feel really isolating in a world that values conformity.
It can. But Methodist teaching also emphasizes following conscience, guided by scripture, tradition, reason, experience, and that witness of the Spirit, that inner sense of God's guidance.
It gives courage.
It can provide the inner strength, the conviction, to stay on that narrow path, even when it means being different, resisting social pressure, and choosing God's way over the world's way.
This has been fascinating, really digging into the layers of this sermon. If we were to sort of boil it down, what are the main takeaways we should hold on to?
I think the core message is that stark choice, that unavoidable decision. There's the broad way seems easy, lots of company, maybe even worldly success attached, but its end is destruction.
Okay.
And then there's the straight gate and narrow way. It's hard. It demands effort, interchange, real holiness. Fewer people choose it. It might involve being misunderstood or facing opposition, but its destination is life eternal.
And that word strive is just crucial. It's not passive.
Not at all. It's a call to intentional, energetic, ongoing effort. We have to actively choose and pursue this narrow path, consciously rejecting the world's values and embracing holiness. It's a reminder that our spiritual destiny isn't accidental. It requires our full commitment.
So, a final thought, perhaps, for you listening. Take a look around at the paths most people seem to be on. Do they reflect the qualities of that straight gate we've been discussing? And maybe more personally, what would it look like for you right now to intentionally choose that narrow way? What steps would that involve? And where might you find the strength and support you need? It's not about judging anyone else, of course, but about that deep personal reflection on where we're truly headed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.